I had a request to do a tutorial on this effect, which I recently posted on my social media and got some feedback on it, people asking, how do you do this? And this technique of making what appears to be a hole in the figure is actually pretty simple. It doesn't require a lot of layers in Photoshop. So let's go into Photoshop. I've already isolated the image, and if you need help with isolation, I have some tutorials on how to isolate your image. So let's skip that step and get right to this technique. So now I have an isolated image, and I'm going to put a background behind it. In this case, I'm going to go down here and I'm going to add a gradient background. Now automatically it's going to pop up with whatever gradient is by default, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the gradient which would be my foreground and background color. That's not actually the colors I want, but it gives me a start. So now I'm going to switch the colors in this gradient. I actually want my colors to be very similar, so I'm going to double click on this skin tone and I'm going to choose the other side of the gradient so they're almost identical. And then I'm just going to drag that slightly and lighten up one side of this gradient until I feel like I have a good subtle gradient. Now I'm going to OK that, and I'm going to change it to where the dark part is going to the bottom right and the light part is going to the top left. So my angle here is at about 33 degrees. Hit OK, and then I'm going to drag this back behind my figure. So if I zoom out, you can see now that I have a background color behind my figure, and I want that to show through what appears to be a hole or a missing piece in the figure herself. I'm going to start off by creating a triangle. Now you can go over here to your shapes and you will not find a triangle. However, if you go down into the custom shape tool and then you click on the little drop down here, you will get a number of shapes. Now, if you don't see all of these shapes, there's a little settings gear here that will allow you to load up shapes. And what I'm using is just the shapes, which you can load up and append if you don't already see them there. But here I have a library of shapes, and I'm going to look for something that is a triangle. So you'll notice that I have a triangle right here. So I'm going to select that. And I'm going to go back to my image and I'm going to draw out that shape. Hold down on the Shift key while you draw it out, and that will keep it uniform scale on all sides. So I'm going to do that and draw it out. Now automatically it's just filling my shape with my foreground color. And because that's skin tone, I'm having a hard time seeing it. So I'm going to actually just change that shape to something that's very obvious for now. So there we have black. And now I don't want a sharp edge on it. You'll notice that on my original image, there was a bit of a rounded edge on this. So what I want to do is round off the edges of this. So Command or Control if you're on a PC, and then click your thumbnail, and what that will do is load that layer as a selection. And now that I have that selection, I'm going to turn off my shape layer entirely. I'm just going to modify this selection a bit. I'm going to go up here to where it says Select. I'm going to select Modify, and then I'm going to smooth my selection. And I'm going to sample radius 20 pixels for this smoothing and hit OK. Now depending on how large your image is, your smoothing radius may vary. So this is to taste. But you'll notice that 20 pixels gave me a nice rounded edge on this rectangle that was pointed on the edges. Now I need to turn this into a mask for my figure. So I'm going to go back and click on my figure layer. Make sure you have the figure layer active and your selection is still active. And then down here at the bottom of your layers window, you're going to hit Add Layer Mask. Now, this did the exact opposite of what I wanted. But that's okay. It's very easy to invert masks just by hitting Command or Control I. So when I hit Command I, I now inverted my mask, and you'll notice that there I have a mask on my figure that allows me to see through to the background. Now I also want another shape, and you'll notice if I go back to my reference, I want there to look like on this side of the figure is a larger hole, so that this hole is receding through the figure. And in order to create that shape, which actually, hang on, we're gonna broaden this triangle a little bit more. I'm going to unlink my mask from my figure, and while I have the mask selected, I'm going to hit Command or Control T, and I'm going to size that up just slightly. And I'm going to move it over just a bit. Okay, so there we go. Now, I want to create another version of this exact shape, and I want it to be the interior of the body. I'm going to go back to my original shape now, and I'm going to hit Command or Control T to transform it out a bit to match the shape that we just made. And then I'm going to grab any edge, it doesn't matter which edge. I'm going to hold Option Shift or Alt Shift if you're on a PC while I drag. And what this is going to do is it's going to scale up that triangle uniformly. So that's perfect. Now I'm going to drag it over just a bit, right about here. Let me look at my reference again for what I did originally. Yes, this should be a good start. Now you notice that I have some of the back triangle is overlapping the outside edge of the front triangle. That's going to be important to continuity later on, so let me hit Return and commit this change. And now we're going to do the same thing we did before. We're going to hit Command or Control and click on that thumbnail to load the selection. With the selection loaded, we're going to go up here again to the Select menu, Modify, Smooth, and once again we're going to choose a radius of 20 pixels. I'm going to hit OK. Now this time, while this selection is still active, I'm just going to turn the shape layer off so we don't see it for a minute. And I'm going to create a new group. If you go down here at the bottom, there's a little folder icon, and you can create a new group. And then with this group selected, I'm going to hit the layer mask option. Now you don't see anything immediately occur, but what we've just done is we've added a layer mask to a group. And what I can do is now work inside of this folder, this group, and any layers inside that group will be masked by the layer mask that's on the complete group. So I don't need this shape active anymore. This is just a reference shape. In fact, I think I'll go ahead and get rid of that. I'm just going to delete that. And just so you can see what we did here, and you don't need to do this, I'm just doing this to show you where our mask is. I'm going to put a solid color inside of our group. Now you'll notice that I just put a solid fill in there, which should be filling the whole screen, but our group mask is keeping it only in the place we want it. That's perfect. So I'm going to turn that back off, and we're going to work inside of this group. Before we do, though, I'm going to do one more thing. You'll notice if I go back to my reference that right here it looks as though the other side of the hole is cut off out of sight just slightly. And in order to do that, what I'm going to do is hold Command or Control and click on the layer mask for my group. This reactivates that selection we just made. So you'll see that it's active. Now I want to invert this selection. You can do this a couple of ways. You can go up to Select, Inverse, but I find it easier to use the shortcut, which is just Command or Control Shift I. So while I have this active, I hit Command Shift I. And the way you can tell that it inverted it is you can now see that we have active selections on the sides of the screen. It means that now everything outside the triangle is being selected. So why did we do that? Well, now we're going to go back down to our figure. You're going to use white as your foreground color and paint here. All right, so now that you've used white, what you've done is now make that piece of skin visible once more. So if we look back at our reference, that's going to be this area that's overlapping that hole. So I'm going to deselect this. Now I'm going to go up in my group and I'm going to create a new layer. 2 new layers actually, and you'll notice that they both automatically go into the group. So if I close the group, I can see they're included in that, so they should be under this mask. And now what we want to do is start giving some dimension to this hole. The way I'm going to do that is with my brush tool active, I'm going to hit Option or Alt. I'm going to select a skin tone here, just any good mid skin tone. I'm going to go up here to opacity, and I'm going to bring the opacity of my brush pretty far down. Let's start it low, around 5%. I'm also going to go here and make sure the hardness to my brush is set at 0. You can do that by right-clicking, or you can go right over here in your brush palette, and you can make sure that the hardness is set to 0. So now the hardness is set to 0, opacity at 5, and I'm using a general skin tone. I'm going to go here to my layers panel, and I'm going to set this to multiply. And now I'm going to paint in as if there are some shadows appearing on the skin here. I'm just stroking this so that it appears that there are shadows and that there is some shading inside of this hollow area. All of this is still being contained by our mask for this group. So you can see here, this is working out nicely. This is a good beginning. Now I want to differentiate, and you have to think about light when you're doing this. It's really on you to figure out where's the light coming from. And in my picture, the light is coming from the top left. So this inside should be fairly dark, and I'm going to keep darkening this down. And if you find that your brush opacity needs to go up a little bit, you can raise that. I'm going to set mine at 10%. I'm going to make my brush a little bit bigger, and then I'm just going to keep drawing in. I really recommend using a pen tablet if you have one. It's not essential, but it is helpful. All right, we're starting to get a nice shape going on here. And I'm going to just fill in this little bottom edge of this quite a lot, because I think there we're going to have a lot of shadow. So now we can see it coming along really nicely. We've got a nice shape that's happening here. I'm going to continue to change the size of my brush every now and then to just paint it how I want it. Now I want to add some additional darkening. So you notice I had this layer. Let's call this skin 1. And let's go down to the second layer and call it skin 2. I'm going to also set this layer to multiply. And I'm going to paint a little more. And what you'll see happening here is that it even further darkens that down, because these 2 layers are now multiplying on top of one another. So it intensifies that darkening effect. You can do this to your taste. I like to spend time making sure this looks good because it's the details that make it convincing. And you'll notice that since we're painting with a skin tone, and actually the skin tone we're using is relatively light colored, it's not black or gray. It's not reducing the color of the skin at all, even though it does show a sort of darkening. That's important. I don't want to paint with black or gray here because those would desaturate the skin as shadowing. So we can even hold down Option or Alt and sample a new skin tone over here that's a bit darker and continue to paint in on that layer. Do this as long as you want. By the way, the brush I'm using here is just a very simple pressure-sized brush, which means that if you're using a pen tablet, the harder you push, the bigger the brush will be, and the lighter you push, the smaller the edges will be. And that helps a bit with precision, but again, not necessary, it's just useful. Okay, so that's a start, but we do want to soften these edges a bit. So what I want to do is actually create a new group with the opposite mask on it. What I'm going to do here is create another group up above here. I'm going to hold Command or Control and click on that layer mask so I load this shape again. And then I'm going to hit the Add Layer Mask button like we've done several times before. And you'll see that I have an identical mask. But now I'm going to hit Command or Control I, and I'm inverting that mask. So this mask is now the exact opposite of the mask below it. Let's create a layer inside of there. And now with our brush tool and our layer set to multiply like we were doing before, let's try painting right along the line here. And what you'll notice is now my paint is going outside instead of inside of the triangle. What this is allowing me to do is to smooth out that too rough of edge that I created with that mask. It just feathers it slightly and it gives me a lot of control over it. So I still have an edge, it's just not as hard as it was. So we're going to call this darken. And then the next one, we're actually going to start lightening some things up here. We're going to call lighten. This layer we haven't painted on yet, but let's set it to screen. And let's choose another skin tone, maybe a lighter skin tone. So I'm going to hit Option or Alt if you're on a PC. Select a light skin tone. I'm still painting with the same brush. I haven't changed brushes at all. I'm just going to start painting in along the edge of this right side. And you'll notice what this is doing is creating a sort of highlighted effect. This is nice because it gives the illusion that light is hitting that edge there. So it makes it seem as though the light from this side is catching that. And we want a little bit of that. Just a bit around the corners. Now I also want some of that inside. So I'm going to create another layer down here, which I will call Lighten 2. I just realized I called the top one lightning. That's impressive. Okay, so now I've got this Lighten 2. I'm going to set this to screen mode again. So we're doing the same thing that we were doing outside. Now we're going to do it inside a bit. Same color skin. I'm going to start painting here. And what this is going to do is give a little bit of highlight inside as if the light is hitting that area. I'm going to paint the other side as well because it seems like light would be coming in from that angle also. Now let's stop and look at this for a second. You see that through this middle, we're seeing our paint. That's not ideal, but don't worry about that just yet because we can get rid of that easily. Just go ahead and keep painting until you have things the way you want them. I'm going to keep painting right along this edge here. And then I'm going to go up to this lightning and continue painting. What we're doing now is just refining it. We're trying to get it the way that we want it. And this is going to take a little bit of time, so have patience and work it until you got something that you really like. Let's back out. Now this isn't perfect, but this is a great beginning. And you can of course take this technique and continue on with it as far as you want to go. What I would suggest doing is creating another darkening layer that is having another multiply layer and going ahead and keep sampling more skin tones and keep adding in darker, less saturated skin tones until you can get the look that you really like. Till you get the right opacity that you really like, and just keep working it. So you come up here and continue to refine that little edge there. The smaller the brush, the better the detail will look. Now, I promised you I'd tell you how to get rid of this mess in the middle here, and that's actually not difficult at all. So what we have is this mask here. We can click, command click, or control click on a PC on the mask for your figure. You'll see that that's that interior there. So while we still have this selection active, make sure you hit Command Shift I to invert that selection. And then let's go up to our group. We're going to click here on this group. Make sure you're selecting the mask. And then we're going to fill the mask area that's selected with black. The way you would do this is you need to look over here and make sure that your background and foreground colors are black and white. If they are not, hit D, and that will turn them black and white. Now that you have a black and white background and foreground, you're going to hit Command or Control Delete or backspace. Now what this has done is it's actually masked that area out on this group. If I delete this mask, you can see that's where our paint is if it weren't masked at all. This is where it is once we have it masked out. The great thing about this too is we can grab these two groups and we can move them along with the mask for the figure if we don't like them in that position. Because all we did here is paint. We didn't actually edit the figure of the woman at all. So we can take these and move them down here or around here, and then we can grab that mask on the figure and move it around to fit wherever we want it to be. So if you don't have it in the right spot, you can move it wherever you want. And let's look at our reference again. So you can tell I spent a little more time darkening and painting around the edges of this one. You can obviously spend as long as you want making this happen. I won't belabor this tutorial by continuing to paint various colors on here. Spend your time, get it the way you want it, make it right. But you could do this with a hand, with a torso, anything you want. You can use the same technique. In fact, it's not restricted to humans. You could do this with trees, or you could do this with books, or anything that interests you. So I challenge you to take this technique, try it out on an image, and then let me see what it looks like. I would love to hear your feedback, and I'd love to see what you make with this little hole in the body technique. If you have any questions, hit me up in the comments. And if this was useful to you and you like it, please subscribe, and I will try to get you more information, even cooler than this, next time.